calls the new plan to destroy Israel. You see, the old plan failed. Iran and its proxies tried to encircle Israel with a ring of fire and to attack us with the horrible attack of October 7th. But the people of Israel, the soldiers of Israel, rose like lions to defend our country. We crushed Hamas, we devastated Hezbollah, we hit Iranian proxies in Syria and Yemen. And when Iran directly attacked us twice last year, we struck back inside Iran itself. Yet in defending ourselves, we also defend others. We defend our Arab neighbors. They too have suffered from Iran's campaign of chaos and carnage. Our actions against Iran's proxy Hezbollah led to the establishment of a new government in Lebanon and the collapse of Assad's murderous regime in Syria. The peoples of those two countries now have a chance for a different future, a better future. So too do the brave people of Iran, and I have a message for them. Our fight is not with you. Our fight is with the brutal dictatorship that has oppressed you for 46 years. I believe that the day of your liberation is near. And when that happens, the great friendship between our two ancient peoples will flourish once again. I want to assure the civilized world, we will not let the world's most dangerous regime...
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking there after the Israeli military confirmed it had carried out dozens of strikes across Iran, saying it was targeting nuclear sites in the country, citing the existential threat from Iran. Earlier explosions were heard in the Iranian capital and in other parts. Israel has just declared a state of emergency in Israel, warning of retaliatory action and urging citizens to limit themselves to essential activity only. For the latest, let's now cross to Noga Tarnopolsky, our correspondent in Jerusalem. Noga, thanks very much for joining us at this last minute. We have been hearing much about this from particularly the United States, warning of an imminent Israeli strike against Iran. To what extent was this expected in Israel?
Well, obviously, the Israelis have been hearing these, principally U.S. media, but also yesterday, Israelis were apparently now caught a kind of a feint. We did hear that there was a cabinet meeting, a very loud cabinet meeting yesterday, in which the IDF Chief of Staff, General Eyal Zamir, vociferously recommended that Israel not attack Iran without U.S. support, not do so unless the U.S. were also militarily involved. And we now are understanding from a briefing I was just on that Israel is attacking Iran in a very wide and deep attack. We heard from the Prime Minister that this includes the Natanz nuclear site. We don't know about Fordow, but there are others. It appears that Israel is also attacking senior regime officials. The spokesman of the Israel Defense Forces said they're legitimate military targets, and it appears to be doing it completely without U.S. intervention. In fact, Secretary of State Rubio has just issued a statement saying as much.
I'd like very much to return to that point in terms of the ties between Israel and the United States in a moment. But we've heard the Israeli military saying this operation, it's preparing for an operation that will last, that could last a long time. How open is the Israeli military being about what it has planned?
Well, it's a brand new operation that we launched about an hour ago. I mean, in terms of the strikes themselves. And what I have just been told is that this is an operation expected to last weeks. So that's pretty significant. Beyond that, we haven't had details, but all of Israel, the entire state, is now in a special emergency situation. Every single citizen in the state of Israel has been warned to remain for now close to air raid shelters, not yet in them, but close to them. Sirens sounded all over the country about an hour ago now, warning sirens, not of an incoming attack, but of this special, emergency situation. I just want to point out something. It may be an irrelevant detail, but among Israelis, there was a widely held assumption that Israel would not attack before Sunday both Sunday, because the Oman talks between the United States and Iran are scheduled to take place then. And there was an assumption that Donald Trump, in his most recent conversation with Netanyahu, had basically nixed that possibility.
And indeed, we heard... I beg your pardon, do continue.
The detail I wanted to add is just that the Prime Minister's youngest son, Avner Netanyahu, is scheduled to be married on Monday. And there was a similar assumption that no operation would be launched that could wreck that wedding.
As we were talking about, Donald Trump was saying just hours ago that he thinks that a deal with Tehran over the nuclear program could be imminent. And so this strike obviously underlines the ever-widening gap between the US and Israel. Where do you think this could go from here, given that last year, when Iran struck Israel with ballistic missiles, it still required US and even UK intervention on some levels, despite its formidable defense systems?
That's right. And also France. And let's remember also the last two Iranian attacks, the only two Iranian attacks against Israel involved even Saudi jets, French jets. An entire alliance came together very quickly to protect Israel. I don't know how much of that is getting underway now. Israel clearly expects that there will be a major retaliation. That is how it's speaking to its people. I expect myself that there will be some retaliation. I don't know. We know that Iran has engaged in preparative action for a retaliatory strike. I assume this has to do with long-range ballistic missiles, but I can't be sure of that.
Well, indeed, at this point, all the details are still coming in thick and fast as the developments continue there. Thanks for the moment, Noga. Thanks very much. We'll undoubtedly be speaking to you again very soon, Noga Tonopolsky there in Jerusalem. Let's now cross to our correspondent in Washington, Fraser Jackson. Fraser, great to have you along as well. We've been hearing that Donald Trump, of course, was warning Israel against carrying out strikes against Iranian nuclear sites. Clearly, Benjamin Netanyahu has blatantly ignored this. Marco Rubio, we heard saying that the US has nothing to do with this. Where does this leave us in terms of Israel-US relations?
I think the thing that's interesting to note here is that the Israelis, there was reporting recently that the Israelis had told the Americans that they were ready to launch this full-scale strike. Of course, now the Israelis are saying that this was a preemptive strike, but we're hearing from sources, as Noga said, that this is not going to be a one-off, and this could last multiple days, if not weeks. And clearly, that was enough to prompt Donald Trump to move the force posture in the region, as we saw in the last 24 hours. He issued effectively an evacuation order for the embassy in Baghdad, as well as the spouses of military officers and military personnel at various other bases in the Middle East. That in potential anticipation of a retaliation strike by Iran to what we now know was these impending strikes. Now, we do not have any idea that Donald Trump knew the strike was going to take place this evening. It should be noted that there was a lot of buzz between me and my colleagues and other sources that I was talking to that these strikes might happen last night. And indeed, the timing of this has caused at least those of us not directly in the know somewhat flat-footed. I am currently, full disclosure, at an event at the British Embassy here in Washington, D.C. And the news of these strikes was news to many people who I know who are in quite senior roles at the embassy here as well. So whether the American government knew that they were coming, of course, they knew that there was a prospect of that was going to potentially happen. But whether they knew directly that these strikes would happen this evening remains to be seen. I will be with the president tomorrow. That will be the focus of my questioning to the president tomorrow. But for now, yes, that statement from Marco Rubio, making sure that the world knows that America was not directly involved in these strikes. It says, tonight, Israel took unilateral action against Iran. We are not involved in strikes against Iran, and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region. Israel advised us that they believe this action was necessary for its self-defense. President Trump and the administration have taken all necessary steps to protect our forces and remain in close contact with our regional partners. Let me be clear, Iran should not target U.S. interests or personnel. That there clearly the worry from the U.S. as to why we saw that the change of posture towards the embassy and other bases in the region. More broadly, where this leaves relations between Netanyahu and Trump, things are definitely more sour for Netanyahu this time around than they were during the first term. I think Netanyahu thought he was going to have quite a good relationship with Trump this time around, but in contrast to his first term, where he generally deferred to Israel on these kind of matters, Trump is keeping Netanyahu at more of a distance this time around and has even rebuffed his recommendations numerous times. Trump has actively said many times he doesn't want war. He is trying to actively pursue these negotiations for Iran's nuclear program. And just hours ago, he tweeted on his platform, Truth Social, saying we remain committed to a diplomatic resolution the Iran nuclear issue. So whether Netanyahu has effectively gone against Trump's orders here and whether he is likely to be suffering the ire of Donald Trump now in private is what we're going to be trying to dig into when we get back to the White House tomorrow morning.
All right, well, Fraser, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks very much for that, all of that information. We are, of course, getting plenty more updates as we speak. We're also picking up on Fraser's touching on the Iraq, U.S. withdrawing staff from the Iraq embassy. And we also have Iraq, neighbouring Tehran, of course, closing its airspace. We've just had in the past minutes, and many more developments coming into us here at France 24. We'll try to stay across all of them, of course, and we'll keep you up to date as they come in. Thanks very much for staying with us. We'll be back in a little over 15 minutes.
A death spiral in Gaza with no end in sight, a Middle East peace process that's been moribund for years. What's the point of talking solutions when not even a truce is in sight? In New York next week, France slated to co-chair with Saudi Arabia what's officially billed as a UN International Conference for the Peaceful Settlement of the Question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. Emmanuel Macron strongly suggested that would be the venue where he might recognize a Palestinian state. Is it still the case? We'll ask about the pressure on the French president to dial it back. With the U.S. silent as Israel pounds Gaza and expands illegal Jewish settlements in the West Bank, what does recognizing Palestinian statehood change in practice? On Friday, Paris to host a springboard event, you might call it. We'll hear from civil society participants in a conference hosted by the Paris Peace Forum. How to find common ground to proposals that can win over a population where positions have hardened for so long. Today in the France 24 debate, we're wondering if it's a utopia or is a two-state solution the only realistic option. Joining us with us here in Paris, taking part in that conference, East Jerusalem native Niveen Sanduka, Regional Director for the Alliance for Middle East Peace. It's an umbrella group, right, various civic organizations. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for hosting me.
Nobi Bar Yaakov, Associate Fellow at the Geneva Center for Security Policy. We're used to having you by video link from London. Welcome to our studios in Paris.
Thank you very much for having me in the studio.
Former French ambassador to Saudi Arabia and Qatar, Bertrand Besancenot. Good to see you.
Thank you very much.
And France 24's Shirley Sitbon covering it all. How are you?
Okay, Francois.
All right. By the way, on the go, you can always listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Okay, so with no end in sight in Gaza, Israel's traditional allies no longer able to ignore their own public opinions. And it's on a visit to the Egyptian side of the Gaza border in April that Emmanuel Macron pointed to a formal recognition of a Palestinian state coming potentially, quote, in the coming months. That was followed up by a tweet, this tweet on April the 11th, where Macron said, I support the legitimate right of Palestinians to a state and to peace, just as I support the right of Israelis to live in peace and security. both recognized by their neighbors. The upcoming conference on the two-state solution this June must be a turning point. That conference is the one next week. But as the conference draws closer, France's president seems to be hedging his bets, listing conditions like when he spoke to reporters on a trip to Singapore 2 weeks ago.
The creation of a Palestinian state must follow the release of hostages, the demilitarization of Hamas, and Hamas not being involved in its governance. It must also be accompanied by a reform of the Palestinian Authority and must be a state that recognizes Israel and its right to live in security.
Bertrand Besancenot, now, at no point has Emmanuel Macron stated categorically, I will recognize a Palestinian state in New York mid-June. But do you, judging by the wording, the diplomatic ease that we've just unveiled here, is he dialing it back?
But we have heard exactly what he said in Singapore, where it was said in diplomatic terms. This is clear. The intention of recognizing a Palestinian state is clear. Now, the matter is when and how. Of course, there is the opportunity of the conference in New York. And of course, I cannot speak for President Macron, but my understanding is that the decision is certainly made in his mind, but he would wish to have more a collective move instead of a French alone decision.
Collective means who?
But partners like UK, Canada, Belgium, or others. At least it is my understanding that he thinks it would be much more important if you had a move. And in particular, this conference in New York has a very clear purpose, which is to launch a kind of momentum in favor of the solution of two states, building on the fact that a huge majority of states have already recognized the Palestinian state. So the purpose is very clear. Now, of course, as you said, there are pressure coming from different sides. And there are 8 groups working in New York already. And of course, the decision will be made knowing what can be said in the communiqué and on what President Macron and others can rely to make their own decision. So I think the aim is clear. The timing is still a question mark.
The timing is still a question mark. So if you're a betting man, would you say, yes, he will, in New York, say, I recognize a Palestinian state, or the stars not aligned?
My personal feeling is that, no, he will wait to see exactly what will be said in the communiqué. If there is, for example, a very compelling process towards the creation of a Palestinian state, this might assist. It is true also that the only person who can really put pressure on the Israeli is President Trump. So there are already, of course, discussions, and I'm sure that to take the other person who will be important on that, it is the Saudi Crown Prince. But on one hand, he made it very clear his position. On the other hand, he knows that President Trump is the only one to be able to make pressure on Netanyahu. So I don't know exactly how he will manage. So this is the problem, not the objective. The problem is the timing and the modalities.
All right, I want to talk about those protagonists with Shirley Sipton. But before I do, let me give you a few more of the little elements we're getting regarding this conference next week. French newspaper of record Le Monde harks back to Macron's initial hope of what Ambassador Besancenot just described, this snowball effect with other European allies joining the initiative. In its reporting, it says that without that support, Emmanuel Macron could opt for a gradual formula. For instance, the promise of statehood linked to the disarmament of Hamas and a reform of the Palestinian Authority. A little bit what we heard from that clip from Singapore. Without that support, but CNN, speaking to a presidential palace source here in Paris, noticed a bit of equivocation on the equivocation, if you will. We can clearly see that some have an interest in suggesting that we are not moving in the direction of recognition. That is false. We are determined to recognize a Palestinian state in order to create the conditions for the state's existence. Great quote, Shirley Sipton, but of course, it still doesn't say when the French president will recognize Palestinian state?
Yes, I mean, he could say what he said when we heard him earlier, saying, yes, we're recognizing it, but with a timetable and all of the conditions. It's still different from the situation today where France did not set that timetable. It always said that it was waiting for the right time, and then it will will recognize Palestine's independence. And now it's moving around, it's shifting a bit its usual approach. Does it make a difference? Maybe he felt he was forced to do this because of the situation in Gaza, because of what's happening in the West Bank. The fact that Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir were pushing for this, or saying that we're seeing it on the ground in the West Bank. He felt that he had to do something now. Otherwise, well, this would remain in history as France not doing anything when so many countries have recognized
So
Palestine.
Both of those far-right ministers this week sanctioned by the UK, Australia, and Canada. Does that point to the kind of enough of the snowball effect that Ambassador Besancenot was referring to there?
Yes, but I wouldn't say ironically, but at the same time, they're saying that if Emmanuel Macron does recognize Palestine's independence, the fact that it's a state, then they will, they will move even faster in the West Bank and claim new territory. So it's, France is always also afraid of that situation, of actually encouraging that type of extremist cycle, and at the same time being just left behind with a recognition which won't have much positive effect, but more of a negative effect.
And we've had plenty of coverage of this flotilla for Gaza that in the last week, the Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, but a household name here in France is that French member of the European Parliament of Palestinian origin, Rima Hassan. Again, these things that are in the public eye, the strike that we saw of dockers in Marseille who didn't want to export French military goods to Israel, does that weigh on Macron?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I guess everything weighs. The dockers story was a bit shocking, though, because France always said that it did not send any weapons to Israel, only defensive elements for the Iron Dome. So here we're actually seeing that France did not really say the truth. There were secret shipments. They said that they were sending it to Israel, but then Israel would export it to another country. So that's something that I guess the government can't just not react to. I guess it does have some kind of influence, but there's so many elements at the same time. I guess it's not as major of what's actually going on the ground. That's the most important effect for Emmanuel Macron.
Nivin Sanduka, again, with the situation what it is, with what Shirley just described, those ministers saying, well, if you recognize a Palestinian state, we're going to have even more settlements. A country like France recognizing a Palestinian state, is it just a symbol?
It is a symbol, but not just a symbol. First of all, the urgency on the ground. As a Palestinian who've lived all my life in Palestine, I have never seen the situation far worse than this. There is mass murder happening in Gaza. People are being starved and being killed where they're going there to pick up their food. They're also being targeted. The settlements and the settlement expansion in the West Bank is continuing as well. Settler violence, there's no stopping for the settler violence. Just today, there were more incidents in Nablus and main cities in the West Bank as well. Closures and checkpoints, disconnect of West Bank cities from one another. Freedom of movement, we cannot talk about it anymore because it doesn't exist. So there are urgency on the ground right now. So even if we're saying this is just a symbol and we're afraid that if recognition happens, then the Israeli government might do extra measures, honestly, I don't know what these extra measures are. And honestly speaking, the recognition is very important for us as Palestinians right now, because it might be one way where Israel can be held accountable under the international humanitarian law as one state actually invading and attacking another state, which is the state of Palestine. Right now, we're not a state, an official state of Palestine. Being two equals under international humanitarian law, and I'll leave it to the experts here, have a different implication if we're talking about it from the international humanitarian law perspective. At the same time, it's really important, I think, for the international leaders, starting from France, to recognize the state of Palestine, because what is happening in Palestine is not only staying in occupied Palestine. It's actually spinning outwards in the form of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, And I'm pretty sure every single citizen have witnessed that in their own countries, most probably France as well. Anti-Semitism has grown, has enormously increased. Islamophobia has enormously increased. The demonstrations that are happening all over the world, because there is a need to basically control the situation, end the war. This is the first thing and most important thing, is to end the war, to stop the killing of the Palestinians, to bring back humanitarian aid, and of course to release the hostages. And both Palestinians and Israelis are demanding this. In fact, just tomorrow, there's going to be a very big conference in Paris calling for the recognition of the Palestinian state, calling for ending the war and bringing back the hostages.
Yeah, I want to talk more about how you implement that two-state solution in a bit. But first, just to be complete about this, does he or does he not recognize a Palestinian state? When you see Emmanuel Macron saying, well, first we need to make sure there's no Hamas, what's your reaction?
First of all, I think it's really important to look at what President Mahmoud Abbas has stated this morning, and actually President Macron has retweeted exactly what President
in the last 24 hours.
Exactly. So we were talking about the Palestinian Authority is willing to do the reforms. Even President Abbas condemned the 7th of October. And I think right now every Palestinian is actually saying we need for Hamas to disarm, and we need to have a reform within the Palestinian Authority itself.
Now, Naomi Bar-Yaakov, just to be complete, there's this conference in New York next week,
Yes.
the conference you're attending on Friday here in Paris. In between the two, there's a G7 summit, and Emmanuel Macron will be, at one point or another, sitting down with a Donald Trump, who's already blasted next week's conference at the UN.
Where he's called for states not to attend, and he's called for his own staff not to attend, State Department staff not to attend. So, I mean, and he is withdrawing his own staff from embassies in the neighboring countries to Iran, certainly all Iraq, but also Kuwait and Bahrain. So, you know, there's also that preparation for potential Israeli strike. And all this, you can't ignore it because it's all Middle East and it's all related. So, you know, if he hardens his stance against Hamas, which is funded by Iran and armed by Iran, then he's going to take a much harsher stance. So, to answer your question of what Macron is going to do, it depends on what happens on all of those other fronts. And I don't think Macron will act alone, and I don't think he will act necessarily against Trump, because he will speak to him before he makes a decision, and he tends to pivot, Macron. He always.
So you're saying it'll be Macron who pivots more than Donald Trump?
I'm not saying he pivots more, they both pivot. I'm not. There's not a competition of who pivots more, and they're very different characters. So I would not like to compare the two at all. But
Thank you.
No, I'm not comparing. But he is impulsive, and he does pivot. And I think he will be well advised to consult broadly about the ramifications. And I think that is actually what he's going to do. Now, the Élysée came out with the palace. They basically published the letter that Naveen has very eloquently outlined just now. And you know, Abbas is 89 years old. He's deeply unpopular. He's viewed as a dictator who has not served his own people. I mean, all the governments, Israeli government, Palestinian government in the West Bank, and Hamas in Gaza, were elected democratically, but are not acting democratically, acting in an autocratic fashion, and not serving the interest of their own people. So it's very clear that we need changes in all, you know, those areas. So, you know, so the fact that Abbas writes that this is going to happen, it's a beginning of a process, but he needs to commit to the reforms. We need to see what exactly.
So there needs to be pressure on him?
I'm sorry?
There needs to be pressure on
There
him?
needs to be, it's imminent. It's, as Naveen just said, it's urgent. It's beyond urgent. The situation has never been as catastrophic as it is in both the West Bank and Gaza. And the West Bank isn't spoken very much about, but there is basically forced movement of Palestinians from very, very large areas in very large numbers. You know, you're seeing dozens of thousands. It's not 100 here or 5 there. And, you know, numbers, and that isn't getting enough attention. And that's where the danger is. And Gaza, of course, you know, is on the brink of a civil war because there's armament of factions against Hamas by Israel. So, yes, I know. getting there. So it's, you are in a very volatile situation. So if you're recognizing a state, what are you recognizing? And are you doing it alone? No, it's much better to do it in a united fashion with a declaration of what this actually means and what needs to happen. So timing, as Bertrand said, is of the essence. And things can ripple in very negative directions. I mean, the trajectories at the moment are very negative. The question is, how does Macron help to reverse them?
Well, we'll get a bellwether of all of that coming from Riyadh, probably. The Times of Israel reporting this Thursday that the Saudi Crown Prince has told his staff to keep his plane to hand, just in case he does want to jet over to New York and join Macron in person. Bertrand Besancenot, the idea is if MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, shows up, it means something's happening, and perhaps we will get that recognition of a Palestinian state. If he doesn't,
To be frank, if, when there will be a recognition by France of a state of Palestine, it will be a significant move because France is a permanent member of the Security Council, that our country has good friends in the world, so it can facilitate the same decision by others, and but also because France is an active player in the Middle East.